if anybody wants to get started, I do believe we probably are going to group these into tiers. Um, so for me personally, my tier one is one man, and I don't
Are
think
we doing this like
I don't think
Mahomes?
that I don't think that's a hot take. But I don't think there's a gap that big of a gap between tier one and tier two. But I do think there's a clear difference between who my number one quarterback is and number two. So Caleb Williams, I believe he will be in all of your tier ones, but you may have other people in there. Caleb Williams, anybody want to say anything? I think he's probably the most discussed prospect in the last few years. Anybody have any Caleb Williams takes?
Um, yeah, recently, just over the past season, I think people have forgotten just how good he was the year before and at Oklahoma. He was put in a tough situation this year. He had some changes to his coaching staff that to this day I'm not gonna really understand. What does Cliff Kingsbury do? Because it's like I'm gonna save that for the end. Caleb he's just like he's kind of I can't explain it, but potential is so high. I feel like you'd be crazy not to draft him. Especially when you see all the quarterbacks that's good in this league, they're good at improvisation. Well, other than Burrow, but he still can move in the pocket. He got pocket presence. He still is able to create a little bit, but he's not moving like Lamar, Josh Allen, Herbert, or Mahomes, or the rest of them. But I think Caleb just when he can just throw off any platform, evade the pressure, just create things that's not there, and he's still very efficient in the short, quick game. When he's not playing hero ball, that's the one thing that's got to be coached on, not playing hero ball. But I know he felt forced to do that because USC defense was truly horrendous from start to finish. So I understand Caleb when he comes to the league, he just gonna have to be coached on some things. But I think the sky's the limit for him. So I can understand why he's in tier one by himself. But I just feel like the gap to the other two quarterbacks isn't as wide as I thought it was last season.
Yeah, from
Here's my question though, before Brian goes. Um, the gap between we all have Caleb QB1. Would you
Hmm.
consider the gap between Caleb and Drake to be larger than the gap between Drake and Jaden, or the opposite?
I think it's larger.
So the gap between Caleb and Drake is larger than the gap between Jake and Jaden. Because I
Yeah,
like all three, but
It's a
I
good
do think
question.
that there
I'm
is
trying to think.
a clear, like a very clear number one. And then I think we've talked about this with tiers before, where like there's a very clear number one to me. It's very. I think we talked about this when we're talking about hooping. But if there's a very clear number one to me, it's very hard to just automatically put somebody else on their tier if you can't make a sound argument that that person is better than them. Now, if you feel that Drake May actually has a potential argument at being better than Caleb Williams, then I'm all for you putting him in the same tier. But for me personally, I don't envision a scenario in the draft process where I will view Drake May as equal or better than Caleb Williams. So that's my explanation of the tiers.
I
let me explain my tiers. When I look at like tier one, I'm thinking like in most drafts, would this QB go top three if not top one? I think
mm,
the top three QBs in this draft could all have the potential to go number one if if they were all in an individual class, but they're in the draft class together, so obviously that can happen. So I think if like Caleb wasn't here, I think Drake May would go first. Or if Caleb wasn't here, Jaden Daniels has a chance to go first. So when I look at it that way, I'm like, okay, draft grade wise, like individual, like grading prospects, I think these are all tier one quarterbacks. Yes, Caleb
Yeah,
is the best in that tier, but honestly, at this point, I'm not saying I'm getting like down or like less appreciative of what Drake May is. I kind of like Jaden Daniels' potential more. So at this point, I'm thinking, in my opinion, I think Drake and Jaden are probably more tied, or Drake have like a slight edge, but it's closer between them two for sure than Caleb and the rest of the class.
yeah, that's what I'm thinking as well. From a tier standpoint, I was kind of with Christian, but I felt like for that, it's almost like with Mahomes, where like it's a tier zero type situation because you don't want to take away from the other quarterbacks. But if it's just tier one, then yeah, I would have Caleb there by himself because Caleb has been built as like one of what the top three, maybe top five draft quarterback prospects of all time. There was
yeah.
even a former GM that had Caleb Williams over like John Elway, Andrew Luck, Peyton Manning, and a whole bunch of
Nah,
other quarterback
he was
prospects.
licking the boot at that point. That's so crazy. He said better to pay Manning. I ain't never heard no shit like that.
Yeah, but So that's where I would. That's why I say I believe the gap is
Mingles.
Cool. All right, all right. He's not.
okay.
He's not.
So
He's
Go
that's
not.
why I
ahead,
would say
Brian.
the gap is larger between Caleb and Drake than Drake and Jaden. Kind of like as JG said. Now I would probably have. Yeah, I think I probably at this point would have Drake and Jaden in the same tier, but I feel like I know for sure that like Drake would be the number one quarterback in the class if Caleb's not there. With Jaden, I think it depends on the class that he's in. Like next year's class, I believe he'd be number one. But last year's class, I think I'd probably have Drake possibly one. Like even with what CJ Stroud just did, I think you could argue that Drake would be the number one quarterback in last year's class. Whereas with
I mean, yeah,
Jaden,
Yeah,
we
he's
talking about
probably
but we talking about profit. It's no debate. Drake May would definitely be better than CJ Stroud because
and I think Jaden would definitely probably go one in last year's class too. Um, just because if you compare him as a rusher, I don't know if he compares. I mean, him and Anthony Richardson are probably similar as
yeah.
rushers, not the running style, but their ability as rushers. But he's a much more refined passer as a prospect to Anthony Richardson, and in comparison to Stroud and Young, both of them had their flaws. Were they? I don't think those were. If you were to grade prospects, I think an 8.0 grade is like generational, and then the 7.5 is like first overall. I don't think Stroud or Young had first overall grade by most people,
Okay.
but of course you get a quarterback boost. I think Drake May generally will probably get at least a 7.3 to 7.5 grade by most people. Um, so I think he would definitely, or Jaden Daniels probably has 7.0 to 7.3 in any class. So and then he has the quarterback boost in
seven
last
point
year's
three out of
class.
what?
Say it
Seven point
again.
three. 7.3 out of what?
Out
What's
of
his cut?
the is in the 8.0 grade.
Okay, got you. Okay, I just
Yeah.
had to be sure.
So I think out of those classes, the only thing holding Jaden back in last year's class is that he would have been, if we're taking this year's Jaden and putting him in last year's class, he would have been older than the other two,
Okay.
Bryce and CJ. But still, as the season he had this year, he would have easily been the top quarterback in last year's class, I feel.
That makes sense.
That's not to say he's better than CJ Stroud, but because people get stuff wrong in the draft all the time. Because clearly, I don't want to say clearly, but after 1 year, CJ Stroud should have obviously been pick one. But you never know how the careers turn out down the line. But Jaden Daniels definitely would have been the number one quarterback, and easily, I could say the last two, three classes up until Trevor Lawrence's class, probably because he probably doesn't go ahead of Trevor Lawrence, but I think he probably goes over Zach Wilson, and Zach Wilson was getting buzz as a first overall type pick. I mean, I was clearly wrong, but I think he goes over Zach Wilson. If that's a first overall level prospect, I think Jaden Daniels probably holds up as a first overall level prospect in just about any class, other than this one, clearly, because he's projected to go three or two.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
But the pick for the Bears is probably going to be Caleb, most likely, unless something changes that none of us foresee. If you're the Commanders, you have Drake May, Jaden Daniels sitting in front of you. Of course, it's hard to predict it because you don't know what scheme because there's
Yeah.
no coach. Um, but hypothetically, say you're the coach and say you want to build your offense around one of these two quarterbacks. Who are you selecting? Because I think we both have these two quarterbacks similarly graded. I think I probably have a slightly larger gap between Drake and Jaden than you two do. But if you guys were to select one of these quarterbacks for the Commanders' offense, how would you not only decide who to pick, and how would you decide to build your offense around those two?
Um, build my offense. Well, like you said, there's no head coach, office coordinator yet, and I don't. Well,
That's you though. You both of them, head coach and OC, play
me
calling head coach.
personally, I would probably pick Drake May, and then hopefully make a vertical style pass on offense with Jahan and Terry, if possible. You have to get the O line better, of course, because he's gonna die if that doesn't happen. But if the O line's better, you should be able to take shots, go over deep over the middle, stretch the field, and then be able to have outside zone style running. I'm not sure if Brian Robinson's gonna be the running back again next year. Is that confirmed? I'm not sure. Running backs
He should
they
be.
come.
I'd be surprised
He
if
Okay,
should
not.
be, but I mean, as long as he's under contract, there's no reason. I don't think you replace running backs until that contract gets in the way. So he probably got a good 2 years.
Okay. Brian Robinson looked good when actually given the ball last year. The Commanders had a bad habit of banning the run a lot, even on when they was getting yards. So you can't have that. Can't put your rookie quarterback or any young quarterback situations where they're passing the ball 40 times a game. I don't want that to be Drake May's situation. I'll probably go Drake May though, just cause I feel like he's a better passer right now than Jaden Daniels. Whereas Jaden Daniels, he's a pretty good passer. I feel like he will rely on his scramblability a little too much out the gate, and that might set some bad what's the word, bad, not trends
Bad
but bad
habit.
habits. Yeah,
Yeah.
in his play. And Washington be they don't treat quarterbacks like that very well.
Uh,
I don't want to jump in front of Brian, but the bad habits talk applies to all three of these top quarterbacks. But
Right.
for this particular situation, I don't know. I might be crazy, but in my mind, I think you should always go with the who you have as a better prospect. So if Drake May is a better prospect, I think that's who you should take. But as the roster is currently constructed, I do think Jaden Daniels will probably be the better fit immediately. Like, say there was no type of changes to the offense, and you just had to throw one of these quarterbacks in. I think Jaden Daniels would be a better fit immediately, just because of how they claim that they want to play this hard nosed brand of football. But of course, there's no coach. But this hard nosed brand of football where you're constantly running the ball, playing defense. I think Jaden Daniels behind this offensive line is a much better run blocking offensive line than pass blocking. And even when they do go into pass protection, he is able to avoid pressure much more than Drake May would be. Drake May can also improvise as well, but Jaden Daniels is a one-of-one athlete in this class for him, so his ability to scramble probably fits better with a porous offensive line. But Brian, you can go ahead.
no, you're fine, CT. I would probably say, well, I've heard that Jaden has the higher ceiling, so I can see why somebody would probably say that they would take him. But and obviously he's a pretty dynamic runner as well. But I think I would take Drake just because, as JG said, I think he's a little bit more advanced as a passer. And I don't think he would get killed behind the offensive line because he's pretty mobile. And from the little bit that I got to see on tape, his line was solid, but he still had to run around and make things happen. So it wasn't like he was just sitting back in the pocket for 6 seconds like Zach
His,
Wilson at BYU, for
his,
example. So
his line, okay, no more Zach Wilson references, please. Anyway, his line this year was absolutely
Yeah, it was
mid.
bad.
It was bad.
No, it was bad.
It's not like I don't want to say Drake. He didn't manage it extremely well. That's part of what CT said talking about habits. He had this ability of thinking he's invincible sometimes, and yeah, he was doing some things that Big Ben would do or Cam Newton would do, and he's
Josh
he's
Allen.
not built like people. So it
All
was kind of
all
crazy
three
to
of them
see.
are very stupid quarterbacks. I think I don't want to say that, but they all got to look at Josh Allen, and none of them are built like Josh Allen. They all, and that's either with the decision making through the air, Josh Allen traits, the decision making in the pocket, Josh Allen traits, or the decision that you make on the run. Jaden Daniels
He's had
and
two bad decisions that
a
everybody
soaking
saw.
wet 190 pounds through linebackers. Jaden Daniels, please get down, especially if you come to this team. Uh, please learn how to slide. That's the one thing. All three of these quarterbacks, they make some interesting decisions. That's probably their biggest flaws. All three of them,
I think that
interesting decisions.
yeah. I think all three of the QBs, like you were saying, I think they all have to learn how to take what the defense gives them, especially Jaden, because like on that one play against Ole Miss where he got absolutely tattooed, it looked like, at least when I watched the All 22 film, it looked like he had a guy coming on the drag route, and based on the linebacker's leverage, because it looked like he was flat-footed, he could have thrown the drag route, and the guy would have got a good 10 to 15 yards. But of course, I'm sure he saw the green grass and was like, okay, I can make that play. And he also saw the linebacker sitting there, so he was like, maybe I shouldn't make that throw. But I think it's just understanding sometimes, just to take what's there and not try to always make the big play. And that may be a bad habit that has to be take that you have to manage because obviously you don't want to take the playmaking ability away from a quarterback at all. But even like Patrick had to learn, like, all right, just take what's there. You don't have to be a hero every play. So I think that's just something that all three of them are gonna have to work on for sure. But yeah, I just think again because of the passing, the level of passer that Drake is compared to Jaden, you might feel more comfortable putting him in more. You might feel more comfortable putting him in different schemes than you do, say, Jaden, just for that nature.
Hmm.
Yeah, Drake is definitely a plug and play more so than Jaden. I think that's obvious though. I think the one thing I've seen something on Twitter with Jaden Daniels. I don't know who it was that tweeted it, but it's kind of the inverse of what you just said, Brian, because he does do what you said, but the inverse as well. It's like he doesn't always trust getting to his second or third read in
Yeah,
time,
yeah,
so he'll take off. And so somebody on Twitter said sometimes you have to let the play develop, and maybe you have a 20-yard gain instead of a 6-yard run out of bounds. So a lot of times he'll evade the pocket as soon as he feels like he may not have time to get to that second or third read.
yeah.
And what you'll see on film is that once he actually starts escaping the pocket, that second read
Is
opens up.
open. Yeah,
He does end up looking to make that throw down the field. But these are all things that is like this. I don't want to say it's minor, but these are things that you can either improve on or you can live with if you can still get the highs that he brings you as a quarterback.
I think he'll make the. I think he'll learn one way or the other because obviously, as we all know, once you get to the NFL, you have defensive ends and defensive tackles that are some of them are running well, some defensive tackles, but edge rushers and defensive ends that are running 4.5s, 4.6. So it's not like you're playing against what's the team like South Carolina State every week in the NFL.
Yeah,
So
yeah, and them NFL athletes are different. I think that's like the main thing first year players always mention, like the speed of the game is much faster. So Jaden Daniels outrunning somebody like Florida's safeties. I think Florida has had like the slowest defensive backfield for like the last 2 years. Like him outrunning Florida's safeties, it's not going to move a lot of players in the NFL because they run 4.7, 4.8 at Florida, but in the NFL, every
Four.
DB runs 4.5. So it's not easy to run away. Like we even saw Lamar Jackson, who we all know got at least 4.3 speed. He caught the ball. He had a touchdown, but Drew Tranquil, the linebacker, dove and got him. It's like
man,
that's the stuff that if that happened in college, Lamar Jackson probably got an easy touchdown to the crib. Easy.
Sports Center top 10.
So that's just the difference in speed. So those are the top three. Unless you guys got any more to say, I think we should move on to the next grouping of quarterbacks.